Hi, this is Matthew Alexander. I'm a co-host over at Be Better podcast. I have Ann Martindale. She is a spectacular lady who we have on today. She's going to tell us her extraordinary story, and we're going to help push her story and promote anything that we can do to help another person just be better. And if they're having any type of issues that she can help, by all means, reach out to her, and I'm sure she would love to help. So, Anne, if you want to tell me about your story.
Thanks, Matt. So the biggest part of my story started in April of 2012. I was at my parents' house. Two of my five children were there at Grandma and Grandpa's. And my son, who at that time was 14 years old, stayed there with my parents. I had a moment with him where um, I had all these feelings, and I looked at him and I was like, you should just come home with me. And he's like, I don't want to, he stayed with my parents a lot. And I had a moment where I just all of a sudden was flooded with all these really strange feelings of just pride and knowing that he was turning into such a great young man. And I was just really proud of him, told him how much I loved him, and went on my way home. I live about 30 minutes away from my parents. When the last thing I heard Billy say was to my dad, hey, that now that mom's on her way out, can we go out and go shooting? Which was an activity that my son had been active in since he was about 8, target shooting and hunting actively, which is a common thing where, in my area. So I live about 30 minutes away. Like I said, I'd been home maybe 10 minutes. My phone rang. It was actually my ex-husband saying that his current wife had received a phone call. She's an EMT, that there had been a shooting accident with a male at my parents' address. He recognized the address and called me. I immediately, and I dub it due to mom brain. I don't believe as a parent or a mother, you're automatically going to be like, something's happened to my child. So I just assumed immediately that the accident was with my dad. I knew that they were out shooting, and so I just thought it was with my dad. I then started calling to try to get a hold of somebody, and my dad actually answered the phone. So then I asked him what had happened. He said that Billy had been shot. He had accidentally shot himself, mishandling the gun, which for us, we kind of consider a freak accident because this was not his first time handling that gun or a gun. And so we kind of considered it a freak accident. The entry wound went in just under his belly button. We didn't know at the time, but it had nicked his descending artery. So they took him. I got on the road, started to head back that way. The EMTs took him. They called me and said, meet us at the airport that was about 30 minutes away. We're going to life flight him to the next larger hospital an hour away. I, again, not thinking overly clearly, kind of just assumed that I would get in with him. I don't know why I thought that, but I thought the reason they would have me get off the road was to get in with him. But I found out that the helicopter had already left. They just mostly wanted to get me off the road for safety purposes, they figured. We got to the hospital. It was, like I said, about from that point when I got in with the EMT, my parents, my dad was in shock in the front seat. My mom was next to me hyperventilating. I asked a lot of questions. At the time, I worked at a hospital in transcription, so not on the medical side, but I asked a lot of questions. Did they secure an airway? Was he breathing? What were his vitals? A lot of just kind of some standard things. They said that his vitals were strong. They had secured an airway just for safety purposes, but not because he needed it, but he was not conscious. We got to the hospital. The nurse put us all in a room and just said, the doctor will be with you. When they said the doctor will be with you, my dad realized that Billy must be gone. It didn't register with me. I had the whole way down kept asking about the entry wound, exit wound. And I just kept thinking, worst case scenario, like, intestines, colostomy, some of those things. I have to stand beside, like, I just don't think our brains can logically wrap around worst case scenario. But the doctor came in, told us that they believed he had nicked his descending artery and bled out. And his heart stopped and he actually died on life flight. And then they'd worked on him for about 45 minutes there. The rest of that day, I have to say, that was the most horrific pain I've ever felt in my entire life. Having him tell me that this child that I had carried and watched grow and taken care of had taken his last breath, and especially away from me, and that I hadn't even been there. And especially because of those last few moments I had with him, that I now believe, just from my own belief system, I believe that our souls were saying goodbye. Don't ever push that off on anybody, but it's a belief that I have. And I think that's why I had all those weird feelings. And that's brought me some comfort, but I wish that I had just taken him home. Yeah. So, the rest was kind of muddled. I have a lot of almost bitterness to our traditions of, almost immediately within about 16 hours, you're at a funeral home making arrangements and you can't even think, right? And just trying to appease everybody because everybody's coming and bringing and hugging and you're consoling them because they're crying and upset. And a lot of our traditions make child loss worse in those moments, because then everybody shows up, they've done their due diligence, and they go on with their lives, and you are floundering, just absolutely floundering. So for me, for well over a year, I just did not do well. My marriage was suffering. My children were suffering. Billy is one of five. My marriage was suffering. My children were suffering. All my relationships were suffering. And then I read a blog from a mom who had lost her daughter to drowning. I couldn't tell you for sure, but probably less than a year before we lost Billy, or around that. And she said, I wrote in her blog about going to Ohana Oasis. And I immediately just applied to Ohana Oasis and was so lost. We got invited to go probably a year or so later. I don't actually remember the timeline. But Ohana Oasis absolutely changed the entire trajectory of my life. Gave my kids their mom back. It gave me a way to still always honor Billy and know that it's okay to be happy and still live a full life without him here. Yeah. And that's been huge for me. And so with Ohana Oasis, I'm now the executive director recently of Ohana Oasis. We do not have counselors. Everything is led by alumni. So it's, you come, you get yourself to wherever we have our retreats. Then we put you up in the house with other couples who have, lost children as well. We do healing activities together. We have our meals together, but you also get time in between to go together. When my husband and I went over there, it was held on Kauai. So they don't do it anymore since COVID. The prices got too crazy. It's a nonprofit. So it got too expensive to still go over to Kauai, but that's where we went. And I remember standing on Hanalei Bay and I just found my son. I just found him there and knew that no matter what, I wanted to always be involved with Ohana Oasis. So let the founder, Heidi, know that I wanted to be involved. I let her know, she invited me to do leadership. So I went and did leadership a couple years later, and it since had facilitated 4 or 5 retreats, one in Oregon and several here in Idaho. And it just became the biggest part of me um, in a way to keep Billy close to me,
Mhm.
in a way to honor him and honor my grief, and also watch other parents grow the way that I did. It's been amazing. And I don't know without that where I would be, because I watch other parents, and a lot of people don't want to talk about child loss. If you haven't experienced it, you don't want to talk about it because you don't want to imagine that, right? That would be horrific. And you just think that can't happen because I don't think I could survive it. And I attribute all of my survival of it to Ohana Oasis. And so, more than anything, I just want my message to be that there are resources, there's other parents there, and that it really is okay and is possible to have joy and have life after losing your child. And I just feel so strongly that Billy walks that path with me, along with all these other kids. We get ready to do retreats, and we have about 45 kids, and you can feel them just show up in big ways. And I love everything about it.
Wow. I mean, it's a lot to digest. And I
Yeah,
mean, for I want to, my condolence and I want to commend you on, keep pushing forward and finding, what the closure and the peace that you found. I mean, I, I've never experienced that type of loss. And I'm, it, I just can't, imagine. So, that's amazing that you're where you're at, where you're at right now. So I
thank
applaud
you.
you. So, but to kind of go back where you first found the Oasis, can like what was? I know you said you found someone who also experienced child loss, but like what? How long did it take you to get there, and like what made you go with that route versus potentially others?
So my journey in grief was very lonely. It was very lonely. My husband and I, we are a blended family. So he is not Billy's father. It was kind of hard for him to wrap around what was happening. He was sad too. He loved Billy too, but it was different, for me. And I was so lonely. So when I saw that there were people that were honoring their children, that was what I took away from that blog that I read,
Mhm.
is that they went over and had this beautiful experience with other parents where they were, doing leaf releases in honor of their children. And they were doing, all these activities that were specifically about their children. And that was the draw for me. That was the draw for me because, and I've talked to so many parents, and it is about keeping your child prevalent. You don't want people to forget. You don't, I'll never forget, but I don't want the people around me to not remember him either. So to hear that there was people actually doing that, that was the draw. And to know that maybe there was going to be other parents I could talk to was huge as well.
Yeah, I'm glad that. I mean, I'm not happy that other parents have lost their kids, but on the
Sure.
positive side, and I always like to think of the positive side that there is a group out there that is able to help each other with these type of situations where they can learn how to get to that next step. And it's great that Oasis provided that, and you're involved, and that's phenomenal. And I guess what would how does one stay involved but not feel, I don't know, sad? I mean, I don't want to say sad, but just you know dealing with other people's grief and dealing with your grief. How do you keep it separated, or do you keep it separated? How do you intertwine, or how does that look like?
That's a really great question. So one of the biggest things that we teach in our leadership. So once people come to Ohana Oasis, we ask them in an exit interview questionnaire if they would like to continue on to leadership. A lot of people don't, and that's okay. Our number one thing that we look for the people that do want to stay involved is that they want to serve. that they're in a place in their grief where they can step away from themselves to not make it about them, and that they want to serve. So that's the number one thing that's important. But the other thing that we really emphasize that's really as important is knowing your triggers. You're going to, you're going to be triggered by other people's stories. One great example, I was at for other couples, I was the only one there whose child died suddenly. Everybody else's child had been sick. And so I was very withdrawn for quite a while, getting to know the group, because I thought they can't understand. They can't understand because they got to say goodbye. And I didn't. But it really, I asked my dad once, what's it like? Because up until I lost my dad, honestly, I'd never lost anybody slowly. I'd only ever lost them suddenly. And I asked him which was worse, and he just said they both suck. He said they both suck. And I take that because we do have those triggers, so you have to be aware. And we really, really promote for our leadership self-care. Being grounded, being in a good place, and being able to kind of step away from the group, because it is taking on a lot of different emotions. People can be very angry. People also feel like they're the only ones that have ever felt the way they feel. I have found that grief is actually, the feelings are very universal. It's our situations that are unique. So, but it is hard to find the division, but the biggest part is knowing if I know I can carry Billy in my heart, but not need to make him the forefront of the conversation, because it's not about him and I when we're there.
Right. That's wow. I'm glad that, you're able to be staying grounded and keeping others in the forefront to help them during their process. When you say grounded, what are some things that keep, maybe not you in general, but just like what's the common thing that you would suggest to people to keep people grounded to help part of the process?
Yeah. So one of the activities we actually do at Ohana Oasis that is my very favorite activity, because like I said, every morning the facilitator presents a healing activity, and then they take the day to kind of digest it. If they want to share in the evening, they can. We certainly never forced sharing. But my very favorite that I left Ohana Oasis with, that I still do, is called the Be Right Back. There are times when our grief sneaks up on us and it's just not a great time. Whether we're in a meeting, whether, you're at a family gathering, whatever it is, it's just not a great time. So it's about honoring and trusting that you'll come back to it. So you actually, self-conscious, consciously will say to yourself, Saturday, I'm going to just take a me day, get a massage, do some meditation, and I am going to unpack this on Saturday. But then it's actually about making sure that you do it, that you mean it, because your body has to learn to trust that you will address it, because then it just builds and builds and causes problems, right? But that's my favorite activity, and it's something that I do often. And when I recognize that I'm getting triggered a little more easily or different things, I'm like, oh, I am not honoring my grief. I haven't been honoring my grief, and I need to take that time to do that. So that's my biggest go-to.
So basically would that be considered some type of like maintenance in that process? Or would a person need a maintenance during that process? Because I can imagine, like, if someone was going through an trigger episode, and they've been doing so well that we're just human, right? I'd imagine that we would need some type of, I don't know, maybe something that we know that we can quick go to get us back to that area where we feel, I don't want to say maybe safe, or just, in that mind. Wow.
Yeah, that definitely can be a maintenance, because, as long as you're following through with it. Another exercise that we do in that kind of situation that you're talking about is the light and heavy. You think about what you're feeling and you decide if it feels light or heavy. And then if it feels heavy, it's probably not serving you as much. but those ones, that's another exercise we do, and it can be a maintenance exercise. But and all of our exercises have good value. But just for me, the be right back exercise has been the most beneficial in the maintenance of just continuing to honoring that even 12 years later, at any moment, I could fall to pieces, you know.
Something that just doesn't, go away, and it shouldn't, because right, Billy's a part of you and your family, and like you said, we should recognize him, on daily. I mean, he's still a part of the family.
Right. Yeah.
Um, I know you talked about different type of um what do you call it? Like not classes, but like, is there a certain amount of classes one would experience over at the Oasis?
So the first night we get together, we call it Tell Your Story. It's where people will bring pictures of their children and, just kind of get to know each other better. And that's our first dinner together. And then every morning we're together for a full week, for a full 7 days. Every morning we do an exercise together. So you're going to have those like 6 exercises plus a couple, like we tend to go on a walk and do a few things together, get grounded into nature and stuff. So at least 7 exercises every morning.
Oh,
And
okay,
then dinner becomes the part where if you choose to share what you worked on through that exercise for the day, that's where we do that for dinner, is the sharing part of it.
yeah. Well, that's good. It seems like they keep them, well, like a good day. What am I trying to say? They keep the day really going where there's no stoppage, because I mean, I feel like if I was in a state and having any type of downtime, I feel like that'd be any time, a good time to slip, just because I would get lost in my thoughts. So that's a good thing that they have them, that amount. I mean, that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. We do give them some downtime if they would like to go explore the area as a couple. Sometimes people just need that to kind of reconnect as couples as well. But we do we keep it pretty structured so that, it's not just a vacation. We're there. We always tell people you're going to get out of it what you put into it. But at the same time, there does need to be some of that reconnection quietly as well.
Yeah. And is there a portion where there's couples that work on each other? Since I can imagine that, I mean, you said that your relationship was pretty, not doing well. Is there relationships that they kind of focus on that as well, on top of the grief, or like a dual grief session?
So we as facilitators don't really tackle the couple problems necessarily, just because we're not licensed or anything, but you do see it play out very often. And it does become an issue of a lot of guilt. We all have it, we all can look back and go, we should have done something different. A lot of guilt, a lot of lack of support. And those things tend to play out very naturally. And with the correct group, which we usually have, with the correct group, can support each other through that.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
we tend to focus more individually than as a couple.
That's probably better too, right? Because each person has their only, their grief is not the same as, the next person. So to really hone in on those individuals and help focus on their grief and what works best for them would probably be most efficient, in my opinion, I think, right? So, and
Yeah,
I'm sure you're gonna see great outcomes with all the people you've, not trained, but worked with. So that's,
spent
I'm
time
sure.
with, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
what what are some things that one would do after the Oasis? What have you came across that had worked for you?
Like outside of Ohana Oasis, just personally,
Yeah,
or
so
or as a whole.
as a whole, I mean, I know a person can't go to Oasis and stay there for a certain period of time, right? What's something that they could do outside Oasis, or maybe they just couldn't get to Oasis? What are some recommendations or resources that you would recommend?
Yeah. So one thing that we are just starting next month is we're going to have Zoom meetings for anybody that would like to opt into our newsletter so that they do feel that sense of community, even if they aren't overly interested in the retreat portion. So we are going to start doing that. They would just need to sign up for our newsletters, which, they can just do on ohanaoasis.org. The other thing, so much for me is about community and tribe. So, knowing that there's people that know me well enough that know if I'm just having a bad day and I can call them and be like, that you don't have to have a reason. And you can just go, you know what, I really need to just go for a drive. Come go for a drive with me. So because I was so lonely in the first 4 years of my journey, a lot for me has been about community. And the closest person to me that has been also attended an Ohana Oasis retreat is about an hour away. So, not readily available, but, so it is just about having that community. I read a lot, and you can tell, by what I read, my state of mind. If I'm just reading trash, it's because I just want to escape, but I also believe that we have to be willing to speak our truth. If we, when I feel stifled that people don't want to hear that, maybe the grief 12 years later is still hard, that I still just really ache for my son, that I really just miss him. First of all, you need to carefully curate your group, right? But knowing that who I can count on for those conversations. I also believe that serving and living in a life of gratitude. Things can be really, really hard, but if I can wake up, and even if it's as simple as my knee didn't hurt when I got up this morning, or I was able to take a full breath, and, we take things for granted sometimes. So gratitude is a huge part of my personal journey as well. I could not imagine. I would give anything to have my child be here with me, and to not know the pain or know about Ohana Oasis or those things. I would choose him every time. I would choose him. But to see where I was that day when my entire earth shattered in that little, I don't even know what they call them. You would probably know better as an RN. Those conference rooms, or, whatever, where they put us.
Conference room.
Yeah. Consultation room. Yeah. When they put us in there, and I just felt every part of me break physically, like I felt it. And to know now, 12 years later, and even 6 years ago, that I would find some purpose and smile, and that him not being here would mean something. And it could mean something to a lot of people. That's important. And that keeps me going, that, just being grateful for those experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah. As you know, as an RN, when I was in the ICU, we would be on the other side giving the unfortunate news, or at least discussing on, where the trajectory of the patient's care. And it's always the worst thing ever to sorry, to tell the family member, loved ones. And honestly, it gets even sadder because there's some people who don't have family, and you have to, be there and give them the utmost respect of, their life, and to comfort them. Sometimes we would play some music to hopefully that this would be something that they would, like during, their care. And a lot of the patients are ventilated and sedated, and we just do our best to comfort them. But I can't imagine being on the other side, especially if you're not medical, getting these medical jargon and saying, the patient's not going to do well if we do X, Y, and Z, or, ultimately it's just, unfortunate that God's calling, and I I can never imagine being in those places, and it's always not a good time, to have that type of conversation. Conversation is needed because we want to tell the truth, and we want to make sure that the be in full transparency to the patient's family member, and make sure that um, we can make the right decision for the patient, because sometimes the patient doesn't want to be ventilated, or having the next big surgery, right? And we just want to be there, and um, to do whatever they want to do, right? Because we want to respect them. So, um, but yeah, I as um, on our end, dealing with these type of issues, I also needed to find a good support system. Mainly um, during school, I had a lot of issues with uh, testing, and I had reached out to a friend at work who was an RN, and she had this support group where we were able to kind of express our feelings. And I feel like as a man, we don't really um, have that exemplary, or um, the type where we need to express ourselves, which is silly because it feels great to to get those out, and articulate your thoughts, and to really you know have someone reciprocate those type of feelings, and to help you just kind of get your mind straight. So um, it's great to have those type of groups, that support systems, to help you with those episodes. So I'm glad that you're able to find that group to help you, so be supportive. So I can't
Yeah.
imagine. But yeah, the next thing that I'd like to talk about is what are some things that you and your family do to maybe be on a positive side? Like, do you guys do anything to support Billy, or not support, but like shine on him, or so like a yearly thing you guys do?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is around the holidays. The holidays starting about the week before Thanksgiving until after Christmas are rough. They are just rough. I can almost feel like this kind of just cloud come over. I have my other children, all my kids are grown, but I'll have my other kids, and we're just never quite whole. And you can't do anything about that. But so my biggest tradition to honor Billy is he loved the sparkling cider, like the Welch's or the Martinelli's. So about the first week in December, like after Thanksgiving, usually I just go buy a bottle and just set it on the kitchen table. And then my kids know that we don't touch it, we don't drink it, it just sits there. And then like after New Year's sometime we'll crack it open and just all have some. That's a constant that we do. I have found for several years on Billy's birthday and Angel Day, I would do something, whether we went to dinner, whether we usually will visit the cemetery, but whether we went to dinner or whatever. But the last several years, those have been kind of quiet days for me. As I've kind of grown in my grief, I don't feel it as necessary to shout it from the rooftops. And I think that's a very natural reaction. So there's nothing wrong with that, but at all. If you still do it 15 years, 25 years later, I think that's great. If it makes you feel better, do it. But for me, they needed to become more introspective days, just about Billy and I. So I don't, so most of our traditions are centered around a trip up to the cemetery, which is about a 45-minute drive from us. And but then at Christmas, you walk by the table and that bottle of Martinelli's that is there, and that's just about him. That was his favorite, and that's just about him.
Wow, yeah, that's great that you guys have those moments where you're able to have be on the positive side, and respect
Yeah.
the time. So um let's see. Is there um is there anything that crosses your mind when it comes down to like the future? Is there anything that you think you're Is there anything that in the future that you would like to accomplish for the grieving community?
So my everything right now for me is centered around making Ohana Oasis more prevalent. It's been going strong for a decade, but even, we have about, I think 140 applicants right now. I just want every single one of them in the next 3 years to attend a retreat. Everybody that wants to, I would like to continue to grow that application base. Of course, with that, is the donation side of it. Being a nonprofit, we are always looking for the donor part of it as well. But I don't ever want anybody. I think I've made it my life goal. I don't want anybody to feel lonely in grief. I don't want anybody to feel like nobody gets it. Whether they want to attend a retreat or not, I want them to have that tribe, the community. So that's kind of become the focal point of my desires that way.
Is there a message you would send, you would put out there if someone is dealing with the struggle of reaching out? What would you have to say to them? What would be something that would help them want to, get some help?
To talk to anybody that's lost a child, the first thing I would always want to tell them is how sorry I am that they know what that feels like. I personally am not a vengeful person, but I would never, ever wish people to know that feeling of heartbreak and loss of world, really. So the first thing I would always say is that I'm so, so sorry. And the second thing I would say is take the time that you need to come to terms that your life is different now. And then when you're ready to kind of come to some terms that your life is never going to look like what it did 24 hours before you lost your child, that there are people, me, and that there is a host of us that can love you and can honor your child and love you, whether you want to go to a retreat or not. You don't have to ever feel like you're doing that by yourself. So that's what I would want them to know, that it just they don't have to do it alone, whether they want to share in a group like Ohana Oasis, or they just need a good friend. You don't have to live in that pain by yourself.
Yeah, I don't think no one should be by themselves and have to deal with those type of thoughts, because it can really damage someone, mentally, physically, and others too. I mean, it's just it's a lot for one person. I'd imagine, I haven't experienced it, but just my thought. But I'm happy that there's a place like Oasis and you to help guide them to help figure out the grieving process, and having just that support, that tribe you mentioned. I think that goes a long way for a person. And it might not be tomorrow that works. It might not be 5 years, but as long as they keep on trying and reaching out and getting the support and finding what would work for them, that's the part of the process. And as crappy as the process can be, it is what it is, and we have to be positive about it, or face facts.
Yeah, we have to give ourselves grace.
Absolutely.
Really, because I know people whose children have been gone for 30 years and they still just have bad days. And it doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make, a part of your soul was ripped away from you. Absolutely. And it is not natural. It is not natural to bury your child. That's not what we're taught as the way that the natural order of man, right? So that's not what we do. And so I think sometimes people, especially people that haven't gone through it, and they say, I said to somebody, man, I'm still really having a hard time. And they were like, it's been a year. Why aren't you over it yet? Well, don't ever tell a grieving parent, when are you going to get over it? We don't.
Yeah.
We
Which is,
don't.
and there shouldn't be an end time, right?
Mhm.
It just it's non-existent. It's all about how you feel. And you know what? Tomorrow you might feel great, right? But maybe the
Mhm.
following might not, which is okay.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
okay. I think, like you said, people need to be kind to themselves, show gracious, and just reach out when needed. So that's
Mhm.
definitely something that people should think about and just try to apply if they can, or if not, reach out to Oasis, like you said, and
Mhm.
get that extra support that is there for
Yeah. Yeah. And the retreat setting isn't for everybody, but just knowing that there are a group of people that understand when you just say, I can't today, and don't need any other reason why.
them.
We just know that that's enough, you know, and that maybe a whole month is bad because it's a birth month, or, whatever. And just to know that that's what matters.
Yeah. What are some standard, or not standard, but like what are some triggers that could possibly trigger a person to relapse, or I don't even say relapse, but have those type of feelings? Like, is there anything that is common for people? I know you mentioned birthdays, but anything else?
Yeah, big days, it could be a song. So one of my Billy's favorite songs was Crazy Train by Ozzy Osbourne, which is like a crazy upbeat song, right? But when it comes on, I'm like, you know,
Oh,
so a song, it could be a movie. My son loved Avatar. So, Avatar, when that new one came out last year, that was pretty rough.
yeah.
You know, good friend of mine, her, it was Red Lobster, so anytime they'd see a Red Lobster, they'd also celebrate there, but it's sad, so there are so many things that can trigger a person in there, and it's pretty individual. Um, my son wanted so desperately to see everything, and I did not do a lot of traveling, and I do a lot of before he died, but now I travel as much as possible. But I do that because I feel like I take him with me to see those places,
Oh, nice.
so a lot of times when you travel and you're like, oh man, Billy would have loved this, and sometimes it smacks you in the face and sometimes it warms your heart, and you never really know
Yeah, and that's
which is
okay,
going
right?
to happen. Yeah, for sure. Yeah,
How does
you just honor it.
how does the other siblings are they? How do you deal with the grief with children? Is it any different than adults? Is it?
So very poorly, very poorly, and not on purpose. But I really thought that I was doing a great job with my children. And then I remember I was probably a couple years out. It was actually before I went to our Ohana Oasis. I was a couple years out and I was like, I haven't done anything to help my children. And they're struggling and they're sad and they're hurting. But I've been sad and I've been hurting. And so I couldn't see what needed to be done. Um, and so we all just muddled through, unfortunately. I know a lot of parents will pretty quickly get into some like counseling, grief counseling. And I think if that helps them, that's great. I do find, and my brother died when I was 13. And so I'm also a sibling of loss.
Oh,
And I know that like my mom, and I've seen this time and time again working with parents, my mom became solely focused on making sure, and because I was the only surviving child left, made her sole purpose to make sure that I was okay, to the point that she like suffocated me, love her. She just was doing the best she could. But I've seen all sorts of ways. But most of the time, the common theme is that the parent is just trying to put one foot in front of the other, and the siblings don't really get what they need for a couple of years, typically,
okay.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
I don't know
And
how to change that. I wish I could.
well, I think it's also an evolving process, right? And you're doing a fantastic job, I'm sure. And you have great resources. And I'm sure you have even other people who are in similar situations, that can help each other out with that process. So, it's great that, there's that tribe that we talked about that, if needed help, you always can reach out.
Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
I guess we're wrapping up soon. What are some key things that, um, hmm, let's see, what are something that would, if someone was dealing with grief, what is the typical steps that you would run them through?
Well, first of all, it would depend on where they're at. That's not something I've really touched on, but Ohana Oasis, we like them. We don't mind whenever they get on the waiting list, but we like them before they attend a retreat to be a couple years out. For those first 2 years, you're in such a deep sense of shock that you cannot process really anything. So a lot of that, so it depends on the time. If you're just a few months out, just let the people that love you love you.
Yeah.
um, because you aren't even feeling anything yet. And haven't even really, I have a firm belief that our brains have to rewire very quickly or it would kill us to lose our children. And so I think our brains rewire to protect our body from shutting down. That's just my opinion. I can't prove it. But so your brain, if you're new out, you're just in the trenches. And then, we all know about the stages of grief where you're going to get angry and you're going to go through the bargaining and you're going to do the things. But when you're ready to talk about your child, always talk about your child. If somebody doesn't like you talking about your child, find new people so that you can talk about your child. That's it. That's probably the most important part. One of the best things that ever happened for me in my grief early on was someone came to my house for a different reason. And they said, could you please tell me your favorite memory of Billy? I will never forget that moment because it was the first time someone approached me to discuss it instead of me feeling like I was infringing on them to discuss it. So I would also say to people who are dealing with someone that's had that loss, let them talk about it,
Mhm.
So I don't think that answered your question, and I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. But I think that those are really good points, though,
Yeah.
So, um, do you want to put your website out where they can find you, where they can find Oasis, anything that you want to give the listeners to reach you?
Yeah. So the website is ohanaoasis.org. Our application is directly linked onto the website. We also have a blog that we do every month and other resources, to reach out and help. My email, if somebody needs a listening ear or anything, is just Ann, ANN, at ohanaoasis.org. And I get all those emails and I will respond. And don't ever feel like you have to do it alone because even if it's just me right now, I'm happy to talk and I would love to hear about your children.
Yeah, that's all. And I just want to commend you again. Like that's, going through this process and finding um, Oasis and being a part of the community and the tribe and being that support system for others is it's not an easy task. And I just want to say thank you. And if there's anything that we can do to help support you, by all means, please reach out. Me and Nate are always willing to help you or others to be, just a little bit better in life and how, we can be supportive with each other. Because in that in the
Yes.
end of the day, it's all about giving the love and support and learning. So thank you. Thank
Yes.
you for being a part of our podcast. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for having me. It's been great.